If you ever hear that a predator locked its own door because of a human, don't laugh. Don't ask whether the story is true. Ask what the human did, without taking a single step. I used to think it was just another ridiculous spaceport legend, the kind veterans invented to frighten new recruits during long hyperspace voyages. Then Caleb Walker arrived at Black Fang Predator Academy. I was the admissions officer who processed his enrollment. For 16 standard cycles, I had welcomed students from the deadliest worlds in the galaxy. Young predators born beneath crushing gravity, raised in methane oceans, or hardened on planets where every sunrise was another fight to survive. Fear wasn't something they learned. It was something they inspired. Many were born with claws sharp enough to carve steel. Others carried venom powerful enough to stop 3 hearts. Some possessed armored hides, crushing jaws, or instincts perfected by millions of years as apex hunters. Every one of them believed they were dangerous. Every one of them believed humans were prey. Then our registration system made one tiny mistake. Instead of assigning Caleb Walker to the exchange dormitory, it placed him in the residence reserved for the Academy's most aggressive predator cadets. By sunset, the predators had barricaded themselves inside their own rooms, and the human hadn't thrown a single punch. Caleb's transfer file appeared between 2 incoming predator cadets because someone selected the wrong academy code. According to the database, he belonged in biological sciences on the neighboring civilian campus. Instead, his shuttle landed at the largest predator training institute in our sector. No alarm sounded, no emergency meeting was called. Honestly, nobody thought it mattered. After all, what threat could a human possibly represent? When the shuttle door opened, disappointment spread across the platform. The new arrival was about 6 feet tall, wearing a plain gray academy jacket, carrying one travel bag over his shoulder like he had just stepped off a commuter train. Pale skin, brown hair, calm blue eyes, no visible armor, no natural weapons, no defensive scales. Several cadets exchanged amused looks. One quietly whispered, "They sent us a librarian." Another chuckled and replied, "Maybe he took the wrong shuttle." Even I almost smiled. Humans had a reputation throughout the sector. Friendly, curious, creative, soft. They built remarkable machines, but physically, they ranked somewhere between harmless and forgettable. Caleb didn't seem interested in correcting anyone. He simply looked around the enormous courtyard, studying the towering stone statues of legendary predator graduates as though he were visiting a museum instead of the most intimidating academy in known space. He checked the address on his datapad once, looked back at the entrance, shrugged lightly, and walked inside without asking a single question. That was the first strange thing. Most visitors hesitated before crossing those gates. Caleb never slowed down. The second strange thing happened less than 30 seconds later. Every predator within sight unconsciously moved half a step out of his path. Nobody discussed it. Nobody even appeared to notice they had done it. They simply made room. It was subtle, almost invisible, like a flock of birds adjusting to a change in the wind. Caleb nodded politely as he passed, unaware that conversations had quietly stopped behind him. By the time he reached the central administration building, whispers had already spread across 3 floors. Did you see the human? Why is he here? Who approved this? The questions multiplied faster than answers. Then someone checked the enrollment list. The human wasn't visiting. He wasn't delivering supplies. He wasn't giving a lecture. Caleb Walker had been officially assigned to Predator Academy as a first-year cadet. Across the dormitories, electronic door locks clicked shut one after another. Not because anyone had received an order, but because an old instinct buried deeper than logic had suddenly begun whispering the same impossible warning. Something doesn't belong here. And maybe it isn't the human. The administrative office should have corrected the mistake within 5 minutes. That was the standard procedure for every misplaced transfer. Instead, the Academy network refused to release Caleb Walker's enrollment. Every request returned the same response. Assignment confirmed. Predator Academy clearance valid. Housing assigned. Orientation mandatory. Nobody understood why. Registrar drones scanned his identification 3 separate times before displaying the exact same result. Caleb watched the machines work with quiet patience. occasionally glancing around the enormous hall where towering predator cadets filled nearly every seat. Some stood over 7 feet tall, others possessed heavy scales, thick fur, curved horns, or brilliant eyes adapted for hunting in darkness. Compared with them, Caleb looked completely ordinary. That should have made everyone relax. Instead, curiosity kept growing. I noticed something unusual. As I reviewed the observation cameras, every predator student entering the registration hall glanced toward the human first before choosing where to sit. They always selected the seats farthest from him. None of them seemed aware they were doing it. Their instincts reached a conclusion their minds had not accepted yet. Caleb finally approached the registration counter. His voice was calm and respectful. "Excuse me, I think there has been some kind of mix-up." The registrar nodded enthusiastically. "We agree completely." She tapped her console again. "Unfortunately, the computer does not." Caleb smiled politely. "So, what happens now?" "You attend orientation until central administration corrects the file." "How long does that usually take?" "Usually about 5 minutes." She paused while another red notification appeared across her screen. "Today. Apparently longer." Caleb accepted the answer with nothing more than a quiet shrug. No complaints, no frustration, no dramatic reaction. He simply picked up his travel bag and followed the glowing signs toward Orientation Hall 3. That answer confused everyone watching. Predator species expected uncertainty to produce visible stress, elevated heartbeat, nervous movement, defensive posture. Caleb displayed none of them. His pace never changed. His breathing remained steady. His eyes continued scanning the building with calm curiosity, almost like someone exploring a national park instead of entering the most competitive military academy in the sector. Ahead of him, a group of second-year Predator cadets intentionally slowed near the entrance. It was an old tradition. New students were expected to walk through a corridor lined with experienced cadets. Nobody blocked the path. Nobody touched anyone. They simply watched. The silent attention alone unsettled almost every newcomer. Caleb stepped into the corridor without hesitation. Hundreds of eyes followed him. Conversations stopped one by one until only footsteps echoed across polished stone floors. He nodded politely at a massive wolf-like cadet standing nearly 2 feet taller than himself. "Morning." The cadet blinked twice before quietly answering. "Morning." Another student expected the human to hurry. Caleb did not. He admired the academy banners hanging 60 feet overhead. He paused briefly beside a bronze statue honoring graduates from centuries earlier. "That is impressive craftsmanship," he said to nobody in particular. Several cadets exchanged uncertain looks. They had spent years building reputations through intimidation. The human behaved like a tourist appreciating architecture. Then something even stranger happened. Orientation Hall 3 contained 800 seats. Caleb selected one exactly in the center of the room. Within 60 seconds, every surrounding seat remained empty, while the rest of the hall quietly filled. Nobody announced the decision. Nobody gave instructions. Yet, an invisible circle formed around the human as naturally as water flowing around a stone. When instructor BHFY entered moments later, his eyes moved across the hall once before stopping directly on Caleb. He looked at the empty seats surrounding the lone human, looked back at the attendance list, and frowned. "Interesting," he said softly. "Very interesting indeed." Instructor BHFY did not begin orientation with a speech. He began with a question. His deep voice echoed through the enormous chamber as he slowly walked across the front platform. "How many of you believe instinct can never be wrong?" Nearly every claw, talon, wing, or armored hand rose immediately. That answer pleased him. It was the foundation of predator education. Instinct kept hunters alive long before technology existed. Instinct recognized danger before logic could explain it. Vorik nodded once before turning toward the lone human seated in the center of the room. "Cadet Walker." Caleb looked up. "Yes, sir. What does your species trust more, instinct or observation?" Hundreds of eyes shifted toward the human. Caleb thought for only a moment. "Observation, sir. Instinct can be useful, but it can also be fooled." A ripple of quiet amusement spread through the room. Several cadets smiled with obvious confidence. That sounded exactly like something a prey species would say. Vorik folded his arms. Interesting answer. Today you will discover why predators survive by trusting what they feel before what they see. Caleb simply nodded. I am looking forward to learning. There was no challenge in his voice. No sarcasm, just honest curiosity. Somehow that unsettled me more than if he had argued. Orientation continued with introductions from each incoming cadet. One after another, they proudly announced the worlds that had forged them. Volcanic hunting moons, frozen mountain planets, endless forests where only the strongest reached adulthood. Every introduction earned respectful nods. Then Caleb stood when his name appeared. Caleb Walker. Earth. Silence. A few students quietly searched their memory. Earth. The name sounded familiar but not impressive. One large feline cadet raised a paw. Is that the agricultural colony near the Orion Corridor? Caleb smiled politely. No, different Earth. Another student tilted his head. What class world is it? Caleb answered honestly. Home. Soft laughter spread across the room. Even Vorik allowed the corner of his mouth to move slightly. The question had been simple. Planetary hazard classification was one of the first facts every academy student memorized. Caleb had answered with a word that explained nothing. You do not know your own planetary designation? Vorik asked. Caleb shrugged lightly. Back home, we usually just call it Earth. More quiet laughter followed. The moment should have embarrassed him. Instead, he looked perfectly comfortable standing alone before 800 Predator cadets. I noticed something else. Then, every time another student laughed, they stopped a second earlier than expected. Their smiles faded almost immediately, replaced by thoughtful expressions they could not explain. It was as though their instincts kept interrupting their confidence. Vor noticed it too. His sharp eyes moved across the audience before returning to Caleb. Very well, he said. Tomorrow, every first year begins practical assessment. We will see whether instinct or observation proves the better teacher. Excited whispers immediately filled the hall. Practical assessment was the academy tradition every student anticipated. It was where reputations began. Predator cadets dreamed about demonstrating speed, awareness, discipline, and confidence before the instructors. Caleb quietly gathered his bag as everyone stood. A towering reptilian cadet passed beside him and muttered with a confident grin. You might want to request a transfer before tomorrow. Caleb looked up with an easy smile that never reached arrogance. Maybe, he replied, or maybe tomorrow will be interesting. The reptilian opened his mouth to answer, then paused without knowing why. He simply nodded once and continued walking. Across the room, I watched another curious pattern unfold. Groups that had entered together left together, but every hallway Caleb selected became strangely empty several seconds before he reached it. Nobody announced it, nobody admitted noticing it. Yet, one silent question had already begun spreading through the academy faster than any official announcement. If humans were truly harmless, why did every instinct keep making room for one of them? The following morning began long before sunrise. Cold, white lights illuminated the academy training complex as hundreds of first-year cadets assembled inside Assessment Hall 1. The room stretched nearly the length of a football field, its polished floor divided into dozens of testing zones surrounded by observation platforms. Caleb Walker arrived several minutes early, carrying nothing except the same travel bag he had brought the previous day. While other students quietly compared scores from entrance evaluations or discussed rumors about the instructors, Caleb simply looked around the massive facility with genuine curiosity. Instructor Vorik Thane entered exactly on schedule. His footsteps echoed across the silent hall until every conversation disappeared. He stood before the assembled class and activated a holographic display showing the academy crest. Today is not a competition, he announced. Today is observation. Every movement you make tells us something about who you are. Several cadets straightened immediately. Others lowered their ears, folded their wings, or adjusted their posture with disciplined precision. Caleb listened just as carefully as everyone else. Vorik continued walking slowly through the rows. Predators survive because they recognize patterns. They notice hesitation. They notice confidence. They notice the smallest change before anyone else. His gaze rested briefly on Caleb before moving on without another word. The first exercise appeared surprisingly simple. Each cadet would walk alone through a long simulation corridor, while adaptive holographic environments shifted around them. There were no points, no winners, and no physical challenges. The academy merely recorded posture, breathing, focus, and decision-making under changing conditions. One after another, students entered the corridor. Some accelerated instinctively when unfamiliar sounds echoed nearby. Others paused to study every corner before continuing. The instructors quietly recorded every choice without comment. Finally, Caleb's name appeared above the entrance. He stepped inside without hesitation. The corridor transformed into dense forest, then rocky mountains, then an abandoned industrial station. Artificial weather changed from bright sunlight to heavy rain within seconds. Caleb never appeared hurried. He slowed when something interested him, examined details carefully, and continued forward at the same relaxed pace. Observation drones followed from above, collecting thousands of measurements. The instructors watched their displays with growing curiosity. His heart rate remained remarkably steady. His breathing barely changed. More unusual still, his eyes did not remain fixed on the largest objects in each scene. They constantly moved between entrances, exits, reflections, and elevated positions, as though quietly mapping every environment without conscious effort. Nobody had instructed him to do that. When Caleb reached the end of the corridor, he smiled politely at the technician waiting outside. "That was impressive," he said. "Who designed those environments?" The technician blinked in surprise before answering. "Our senior faculty." Caleb nodded with genuine appreciation. They did excellent work. From the observation deck above, Vorik folded his arms thoughtfully. He had expected uncertainty from the misplaced human. Instead, he had witnessed calm attention, careful observation, and an absence of unnecessary reactions around him. Several instructors exchanged uncertain glances. None of them spoke, but each had reached the same quiet conclusion. The academy had expected to evaluate the human. Instead, the human seemed to be quietly evaluating the academy. The afternoon assessment moved outdoors to the academy tracking grounds, a sprawling landscape that combined dense woodland, rocky ridges, shallow streams, and towering observation towers spread across nearly 2 square miles. Instructor Vorikthane stood before the first-year class with his hands behind his back, while dozens of faculty members observed from elevated platforms. "Every species leaves a trail," he announced. "The purpose of today's exercise is not to hide. It is to understand what your surroundings reveal about you." Cadets immediately began discussing camouflage techniques, scent control, and movement patterns. Several confidently compared methods learned on their home worlds. Caleb Walker listened without interrupting anyone. When the instructor finished the briefing, each student received a map and a destination marker hidden somewhere inside the training grounds. They would travel alone, following only environmental clues. As the signal sounded, hundreds of cadets disappeared into the landscape within seconds. Some climbed trees, others followed stream beds or rocky ledges. Caleb simply unfolded his map, studied it for a moment, and chose an ordinary walking pace. He paused occasionally to examine unusual footprints pressed into damp soil, or to notice broken branches swaying gently in the breeze. He crouched beside a small patch of flattened grass, smiling faintly as though recognizing a familiar puzzle. Several overhead observation drones quietly redirected their cameras toward him from the command platform. One instructor frowned at the live telemetry. "He keeps looking behind himself," she observed. Vorik shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "He keeps checking whether someone else would notice what he noticed." Minutes later, Caleb arrived at a narrow crossing where several possible routes continued in different directions. Rather than rushing forward, he stepped aside and watched the landscape in complete silence. Wind shifted through the trees. Tiny leaves drifted across one trail, but not another. Sunlight reflected differently from stones near the creek. After less than a minute, he selected a path with quiet confidence and continued walking. Hidden instructors exchanged curious glances through their communication network. His destination marker lay exactly where he expected to find it. Meanwhile, many Predator cadets reached the same area only to stop and debate which trail seemed most efficient. None realized the human had already passed through several minutes earlier. By the end of the exercise, Caleb returned to the assembly point carrying his marker with no sign of excitement or celebration. He thanked the staff member collecting the results and stepped aside to allow others room to finish. When the final scores appeared, no rankings were announced. Instead, Vorik addressed the class with unusual seriousness. "Some of you relied on speed," he said. "Some relied on instinct. A few relied on experience. One cadet relied on patience." His gaze briefly settled on Caleb before moving back to the group. Predators often believed the fastest hunter wins. That belief has ended many hunting traditions throughout history. Quiet conversation spread among the students as they tried to guess what he meant. Caleb remained silent, looking across the training grounds with the same thoughtful expression he had worn since arriving at the academy. For the first time, several Predator cadets stopped seeing him as an administrative mistake. They still did not understand him, but uncertainty had begun replacing amusement, and uncertainty was a feeling few of them had ever expected to experience inside their own academy. By the second evening, the academy cafeteria had become quieter than anyone could remember, not because the instructors demanded silence, but because every conversation eventually drifted toward the same subject. Caleb Walker. I carried my meal to the observation balcony overlooking the central courtyard and watched students arrive in groups as they always had. Yet something subtle had changed. Whenever Caleb entered a space, conversations paused for only a heartbeat before continuing. Nobody stared openly anymore. Instead, they watched through reflections in polished windows, security displays, or the corners of their vision. Curiosity had slowly replaced confidence. Caleb seemed completely unaware of the attention. He thanked the kitchen staff after receiving his tray, chose a small table near a window, and spent several quiet minutes studying the campus map displayed on his tablet. Across the room, several senior cadets debated tomorrow's advanced perception exercise. One of them glanced toward the human and said with a confident grin, "He will probably get lost before the first checkpoint." Another shook his head. "Maybe, but did you notice something strange?" "What?" "Every instructor keeps watching him instead of us." The table fell silent. None of them liked that observation. At the faculty level, the discussion sounded very different. Instructor Vorik stood inside the Academy Operations Center, reviewing dozens of assessment recordings. The file showed identical results from every exercise. Caleb rarely moved faster than necessary. He never appeared rushed. He never reacted dramatically. Yet, he consistently noticed details that many experienced Predator cadets overlooked. Vorik enlarged one recording, showing the human pausing beside a stone wall during the tracking assessment. "Why did he stop here?" another instructor asked. Vorik replayed the scene 3 more times before answering. Not because of the wall. He highlighted a tiny reflection inside a nearby rain puddle. He noticed movement behind him without turning around. The room grew quiet. Nobody had seen it during the live exercise. "Caleb had interesting," Vorik murmured. "He trusts information before assumption." The next morning, the Academy announced a voluntary environmental awareness challenge before regular classes began. No scores would be recorded. No awards would be given. It existed purely as practice. Most first-year students ignored it. Caleb arrived anyway. Participants entered an enormous botanical dome filled with carefully controlled ecosystems from dozens of worlds. Their assignment seemed simple: spend 15 minutes identifying unusual changes in the environment. While others searched for dramatic clues, Caleb slowed almost immediately. He noticed that one artificial stream sounded slightly different than the others. He observed a maintenance drone taking a route that did not match the posted service schedule. He even smiled at a tiny bird that refused to land on one particular branch. When the exercise ended, instructors compared observations. Caleb had identified every planned anomaly and quietly mentioned 2 additional maintenance issues the Academy staff had not yet discovered. The supervising technician blinked in surprise before checking the system logs. Both issues proved accurate. No applause followed. Caleb accepted a simple thank you and headed toward his first class as though nothing remarkable had happened. Behind him, however, several Predator cadets exchanged uncertain glances. They had spent their lives believing superior instincts made them the finest observers in the galaxy. Yet the quiet human continued revealing something far more unsettling. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was simply paying attention, and somehow that made everyone around him wonder what else he might already have noticed. The announcement appeared across every academy display just before noon. Advanced behavioral observation. Attendance mandatory for all first-year cadets. Unlike previous exercises, no maps or instructions accompanied the notice. Curious conversations spread through every hallway as students gathered inside the oldest structure on campus, an immense circular chamber lined with reinforced observation windows. Caleb Walker arrived with the rest of his class and quietly took his place without asking what the exercise involved. Instructor Vorikthane stood alone in the center of the room beside a sealed gateway that reached nearly 20 feet high. Behind the barrier came slow, rhythmic footsteps followed by a deep, steady breathing pattern that echoed through the chamber. Even experienced predator cadets straightened instinctively. Vorik waited until the room became completely silent. "Today," he said, "you will observe rather than participate. Every predator must learn the difference between confidence and unnecessary reaction." Quote, with a simple command, the gateway slid open. A massive academy guardian entered the chamber. The creature was not wild, nor was it aggressive. It had served the academy for generations as a behavioral assessment companion because it reacted honestly to emotional states. Students had always believed the guardian possessed an extraordinary ability to recognize fear, arrogance, patience, and discipline without relying on words. As it walked slowly through the chamber, many cadets unconsciously stepped backward. Others lifted their heads to appear fearless. A few held perfectly still, determined not to reveal uncertainty. Caleb did none of those things. He remained exactly where he was, watching the guardian with calm interest, almost the way someone might observe an unfamiliar animal at a nature preserve. The guardian continued past dozens of students without hesitation, before gradually slowing near the center of the room. Every instructor leaned forward. Instead of circling Caleb or examining him from a distance, the enormous creature stopped several feet away, lowered its head, and quietly settled onto the floor. The chamber became completely silent. Caleb smiled politely. "Hello," he said in a relaxed voice. "You look like you have had a busy morning." The guardian blinked once, released a slow breath, and remained exactly where it was. Caleb did not reach toward it. He did not attempt to impress anyone. He simply respected its space and continued observing it with quiet curiosity. Several instructors exchanged uncertain looks. This was not the response recorded in decades of academy history. Normally, the guardian ignored first-year students entirely. Vorik studied both the human and the guardian for several long seconds before speaking. "Cadet Walker," he asked evenly, "were you expecting this?" Caleb shook his head. "No, sir." "Then why did you remain where you were?" Caleb considered the question before answering. "Because it did not look interested in proving anything. It only looked interested in understanding the room." A murmur spread through the observation gallery. That description matched the guardian's documented behavior almost perfectly. Yet, nobody had explained its purpose before the exercise began. Vorak dismissed the class a few minutes later with fewer words than usual. As students filed into the corridors, the conversations sounded different than they had only days earlier. Nobody joked about the human anymore. Nobody questioned whether he belonged at the academy. Instead, a quieter question passed from group to group, carried through classrooms, dormitories, and dining halls alike. If the oldest guardian in Predator Academy had chosen to rest beside the human without hesitation, what exactly had it recognized before anyone else did? The change became impossible to ignore after the Academy released the weekly performance archive. Every first-year cadet received a private summary comparing personal observations with instructor evaluations. Most students immediately searched for their own names. Instructor Vorikthane searched for only one, Caleb Walker. The report contained no extraordinary scores, no record-breaking achievements, and no disciplinary notes. Instead, one sentence appeared repeatedly beneath nearly every assessment, demonstrated consistent situational awareness beyond expected baseline. Vorik leaned back in silence. The phrase appeared once by coincidence, twice suggested talent. 7 separate times demanded explanation. He opened the complete observation logs and replayed the previous week from beginning to end. The pattern only became more unusual. Caleb rarely stood at the center of events. Yet, he consistently noticed subtle changes before anyone else acknowledged them. He adjusted his path before crowded hallways became congested. He selected study areas that remained quiet even before other students arrived. During navigation exercises, he paused just long enough to recognize details that instructors intentionally designed most cadets to overlook. None of those actions resembled luck. Meanwhile, Caleb treated every day exactly the same. He greeted instructors politely, thanked maintenance crews when they serviced classrooms, and spent free periods exploring the academy library rather than discussing rankings. Librarian Drones quickly learned his schedule because he always returned borrowed materials on time. He even organized several misplaced reference volumes without anyone requesting assistance. The library curator eventually asked why he bothered. Caleb smiled. Someone else will need them later. The answer puzzled everyone who heard it. Across the campus, another quiet change unfolded. Predator cadets gradually stopped choosing seats directly behind Caleb during lectures. Nobody admitted making the decision. They simply selected different rows whenever possible. One evening, a group entered an empty study lounge only to notice Caleb already reading beside the window. Without exchanging a single word, they quietly selected another room down the hall. When questioned later, none of them could explain why. They insisted they had merely wanted more space. Yet, every surveillance recording showed the same unconscious behavior. The invisible circle surrounding the human continued growing wider. Late that night, Vorik requested restricted access to historical academy records. Very few instructors ever entered that archive because most files described incidents from centuries earlier. He searched for one topic, human. The database returned surprisingly little. Humanity had interacted peacefully with dozens of civilizations, but very few records discussed their educational methods or environmental adaptation. One classified document caught his attention. Clearance required. Death World Comparative Analysis. Vorik requested access. Request denied. He tried again using instructor credentials. Denied once more. A final notification appeared across the screen. Additional authorization required from the Interstellar Council. Vor frowned. Ordinary species did not receive restricted biological classifications protected at the highest administrative level. He closed the archive without another attempt, but the unanswered question refused to leave his thoughts. Why would information about one quiet student require security beyond the academy itself? The following morning, he watched Caleb crossing the central courtyard beneath bright sunlight, carrying a stack of library books with the same relaxed expression he had worn since arriving. Students naturally stepped aside before realizing they had done so. Caleb thanked each one with an easy smile and continued toward his classroom, apparently unaware that an entire academy had begun changing its behavior around him. For the first time since the enrollment mistake, Instructor Vorikthane stopped wondering whether the human belonged inside Predator Academy. Instead, he began wondering whether Predator Academy had ever truly understood the kind of world that had sent him there. Several weeks after Caleb Walker's unexpected arrival, the enrollment mistake still had not been corrected. By then, almost nobody mentioned the administrative error anymore. It had quietly become part of academy history. Students from every department now recognized the human on site, not because he sought attention, but because unusual stories continued following him wherever he went. He always seemed to notice problems before they became emergencies. He remembered names after hearing them only once. He treated instructors, maintenance workers, library staff, and first-year cadets with exactly the same respect. Nothing about his behavior demanded admiration, yet admiration continued growing anyway. Instructor Vorikthane eventually received authorization to review the restricted planetary archive. The document was shorter than he expected. It contained no dramatic warnings and no exaggerated claims. Instead, it described Earth with clinical precision. Death World classification confirmed. Native environment characterized by continuous adaptation, unpredictable climate variation, persistent ecological competition, and exceptional psychological resilience among its dominant intelligent species. Vorik read every line twice. One sentence held his attention longer than all the others. Human survival strategy relies less upon natural weapons and more upon observation, cooperation, persistence, and rapid adaptation to unfamiliar conditions. He slowly looked away from the screen and realized he had been witnessing those exact qualities since Caleb's first morning on campus. The academy had spent generations teaching predator instincts. The human had quietly demonstrated something equally powerful: the ability to understand any environment before trying to control it. Later that afternoon, Vorik found Caleb sitting beneath a large tree overlooking the central courtyard, reading another library book while several small academy maintenance drones completed routine work nearby. "Cadet Walker," Vorik said. Caleb looked up with the same relaxed smile he always carried. "Good afternoon, sir." Vorik remained silent for a moment before asking the question that had lingered in his mind since the first day. "Have you known all along that everyone here has been watching you?" Caleb smiled slightly. "I had a feeling. Why did you never mention it?" Caleb closed his book carefully before answering. "Because people usually learn more when they believe they are making their own observations." Vorik could not suppress a quiet laugh. "You have changed this academy more than you realize." Caleb looked across the courtyard where predator cadets from many different worlds now studied together without the uneasy distance that had once surrounded him. "I think the academy changed me too," he replied. "I have learned a lot here." As evening settled across the campus, lights appeared one by one inside the residence halls. Long ago, doors had been closed because students believed a human represented an unknown danger. Now, many remained closed for an entirely different reason. Behind them, cadets studied harder than ever before, determined to become more observant, more patient, and more adaptable after discovering that true strength was not always measured by size, speed, or natural weapons. The enrollment records would eventually be corrected, but the lesson remained permanently engraved into academy tradition. Future generations would hear the story of the quiet human who arrived by mistake and transformed an institution without raising his voice or proving himself through force. They would remember the day predator instincts met human curiosity, and they would understand what their predecessors had slowly learned. The most remarkable beings in the galaxy were not always the ones who looked the most dangerous. Sometimes they were simply the ones who never stopped learning, no matter where they found themselves.